Hi.
Hi.
Hey, hey, do you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah,
much better.
much better.
Oh, good, wonderful. Okay, I apologize for that.
Yeah, something didn't work, right? But what can you do?
Okay, so introduce. Well, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
So introduce our.
All right. So I'm starting. Hello, everyone. This is our Dialogic Pedagogy podcast number 28, and this time the topic is Dialogic Pedagogy art.
No, you.
Okay. The Dialogic Research art. That's right. That's the topic. Sorry about that. And it was introduced by Melissa, and so we're here with Melissa. Melissa, hi, and this is then Eugene and Anna. And let's start. So Melissa, why first of all you chose this topic?
Well, I did my dissertation using dialogue with a dialogue partner, and I am really interested in figuring out how to talk about dialogue as a research methodology. And I have a question, but I read your article that you sent me about dialogic research art, and I'm just very excited about everything you have in there. Maybe I could explain a little bit about my dissertation, and then we could get in more. Okay, so the way I first got interested in this topic is I took a class on Vygotsky, Bakhtin, and two Japanese thinkers, Ikeda and Makaguchi. In class, I had dialogue with a classmate, and this dialogue really mushroomed into more and more dialogues. And as this was going on, my dialogue partner, his name is Michio, he and I, we met, usually once or twice a month to talk about everything we were studying and to talk about teaching. And then, at the same time, I was thinking about research methodologies, and I was going to do a phenomenological study for my dissertation. And I was presenting at a conference, and somebody said to me, "Why are you using a Western philosophical approach when you're studying non-Western ideas?" And I thought, well, I don't even know of any kind of research methodology that's not grounded in Western epistemology and Western ontology, and I don't even know where to start. But in the meantime, the one thinker, Ikeda, he has published many dialogues, and he's conducted thousands of dialogues. And over time, talking with my dialogue partner and talking with my dissertation advisor, we thought, well, why not use dialogue as a research methodology? So then I thought, okay, let me give that a try. And I started recording all our dialogues. So I have about 25 dialogues that I recorded and transcribed. And but then once I got there, I didn't know what to do next. So I ended up doing something more Western, where I analyzed our dialogues, just thematically to kind of look at what did we talk about and how did we approach dialogue. And so my dissertation, I think, was just my very initial step into these waters. And a lot of the things you discuss in your article were issues that came up for me. And I had to think, I don't really know how to resolve this issue or how to talk about this issue. And your article gives me a lot of language, I think, to talk about dialogue as a research art. So that's just a little bit about how I first got interested in this conversation.
So what kind of questions you have right now for us, or observation, or your thoughts to share,
Well, I have a lot of questions, but one question I thought maybe be interesting to start out with is all research, does all research have some dialogic component to it? And if so, is it just that, there's a dialogic component, but it's not acknowledged or it's not expressly talked about.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, the question is very, very good. And, in my view, I would start with, again, locating that question, which is very good, with this kind of traditional science approaches and maybe even history of the science. But science emerged historically as opposition to religion.
It's just the intersection. You meaning, Melissa, the Western science?
This
Yes.
is a good question. That's a good question. I don't know about that. I'm definitely talking about like good point. I'm talking about Western science. That science, like European initially science that we know, it's emerged in opposition to religion. I don't know how it's in other places. And not only that, and it's specifically focused on things that later were much better articulated by like philosophy of the particular philosophy of science that's known as positivism. That first of all, which is basically, I can reduce to the two main points. One point that the science is supposed to study given, which is positive. Positive, it's not positive as against negative. No, positive in Latin means given.
Existing, something that exists there, independent of you, and is there.
Yeah, and another thing is that idea is that the science actually as a practice is distinguished from religion, initially from religion, but then it would be considered from other practices, like for journalism, for example, by method. So if you're doing certain method, the method will both define that you're doing science, and second, it's kind of, if you're doing method correctly, and if the method is correct as well, so you need to do two things, doing method correctly, but as well as to do the right method. You will arrive predictably, you're supposed to arrive predictably to the valid scientific truth, could be said, or findings, I want to say, but that's kind of constituting approximation to the truth. It's not exactly truth, but it's very good approximation to the truth. And so one part of the science, of that positivistic science endeavor, is to clear everything from subjectivity, or especially subjectivity of the researchers. Researchers' subjectivity should be eliminated. That will guarantee the given things, because it's about given. And the other things, it's about finding the method and following method correctly. Kind of two things. When science moved to the kind of social science, from natural science to the social science, well, one of the problems was that it was mostly studying subjectivities of other people, right? So in this case, what they start doing is objectivizing that subjectivity, which means that the subjectivity will be kind of judged and categorized, not necessarily judged, but categorized by people, different people, and they should categorize them the same way if they train correctly and if that category are good. And so again, elimination of subjectivity of people, but again, make that subjectivity of other people predictable and kind of stable and non-problematic, in a sense that they're like, again, what Bakhtin was called finalizable and finalized and objectivized. It's become an object. So it's kind of very funny to call that. It's objective subjectivity. And a lot of scientists studied that. And again, there is nothing wrong about that, because part of our subjectivity is pretty objective for whatever reasons, and both on psychological, on social levels, whatever. There is a lot of studies, like, for example, sociocultural. Again, that studies is positive in a sense. It's very stable. It's independent of other people, predictable, and so forth. Again, it's predictable, can be statistically predictable sometimes,
right.
and
But,
not.
but there are many, we discussed the other night, there are many aspects of subjectivity that could be predictable. For instance, yeah, people study emotional reactions under certain stress and how that can influence people. And so you can say, you know, that would be predictable. Most of the people, yes, it's to this level, it's statistical.
But certain things are not statistical, and it could be predictable just to the point of every person. But like, for example, everyone needs oxygen, for example, to breathe. It's not statistical fact about including our subjectivity. We can call it subjectivity. For existence of subjectivity, oxygen is needed. And again, that's pretty predictable thing, and it's not statistical. And there is, in my view, there is nothing wrong about that until certain things start happening. So in a way that what traditional science, what I call positivist science, by the way, when I call positivist science, I do not imply critique. It's just like how things are. And this is what this positivist science is mostly interested in, how things are, right? And what's evidence for that? How to verify that? And so, under what condition it is. All of that will define positivist science. And for the positivist science, push forward through this idea of methodology. So there is method. What does it mean methodology is? It's exactly answering questions. What's the correct method out of known method, or sometimes you have to invent new method, that's fine. And whether or not you follow this correct method correctly. This is the whole issue of methodology, in my view, addressing.
It's really, if that method is correct, and if the steps are followed correctly, then it doesn't matter who is the researcher. It could be replaced by anybody else or a machine, and they will correctly find the findings.
Yeah, and in this case, piggyback on what we just saying, there's two things that in a way become objective and universal to some degree. By universal, I don't mean it's the same. It could be conditionally. Under that condition, this condition. But the idea is mutual replaceability. When like researchers can be replaceable, in order for science to act, in order to have valid findings. You know, I'm not talking about truth, but researchers should be replaceable. That's one thing. And if you think about that, the studying phenomena and people whom you study should be replaceable. Because and that's what the science, traditional science, is doing.
Right, because objective subjectivity exists without subjective subjectivity. Sort of like the given.
Yeah. It's constantly given, and again, people in this case, you count. That's why quantitative methods are so proliferating, because you can count. When you're counting, it means the difference is not important. In counting. When you say one, like when I see there are 3 people right now present at the podcast, it means the fact that I say 3 people, it means it's not for some purpose, It doesn't matter what's the difference between Eugene and Melissa, or Melissa and Anna, or Anna and Eugene.
In the podcast.
Yes, in this case, for that, for certain things it doesn't matter. Like, for example, for technical things, maybe it doesn't matter. Or from some other things, it doesn't matter. But when it becomes matter, you cannot say there are 3 people. You need to say, well, it's Eugene, Anna, and Melissa. Okay? And you cannot reduce that. So, in my view, when dialogic, and I'll return to your question, because I'm like now drifting away from that, but in order to return back to that, because I cannot, in my view, reply to you in honest way without doing this drifting around. And and dialogic, in my view, science, and some people say maybe you should not call it science. Maybe you should start calling something else. because science is only about that
Well, I
positivistic
would
thing.
say,
Let me just,
finish, yeah.
no, let's not go to that. We will return back to that as well. I try to remember that very important issue. But how to call that? But the idea is that, well, the dialogic science, let's call it that, are interested exactly in authorial subjectivity, which is not objective subjectivity, in uniqueness rather than something is repeating. And by the way, which apply not only what is studied, but who studies that. So the question for the dialogic science becomes not how things are, but what something means
for the
particular people,
Yeah.
particular situations. And what's the values behind that approaches? Why is this values? How these values going together, like including even question which values better for what and for whom? All of these type of questions, they are outside from positivistic science. But this is where, in my view, dialogic research have to happen. And in this case, the way, if you say, how this dialogic research happen, in my view, this idea of art is helpful because it is authorial. Each time it's everything is authored. You're studying authorship by authoring it, by authoring your analysis, which in a way also your readership put in the position of authors. So in a way, it's never-ending process where, and we're going to the nitty-gritty as well, so don't worry about that, in which data, so-called data, and maybe we should not be even called data, because data coming again from this idea of given. Data become findings, and findings become data, and so on and so forth. There's never-ending things. Because it continues. And the role of the research, in a way, to prepare and to start this dialogue. In this case, following this Leonardo da Vinci statement about art, and since dialogic research, it is art as well, so dialogic research cannot be finished. It can be only abandoned for a while, for somebody else to pick up on that and continue. So, which basically, if you translate what Leonardo da Vinci said about art in Bakhtinian terms, the art is unfinalizable. It's not unfinished, it's not just abandoned. It's impossible to finish, which means unfinalizable. This is where Dmitry Nikulin is very helpful, is separating these two terms, Kantian terms. Unfinished, which means, well, you can stop
you
something.
just didn't finish the jump.
But you can finish later. And it's the finish possible, yes. Versus finish is impossible at all. And I think that's dialogic art is about that. So returning back to your question, so in my view, this positivist research mostly committed to finding patterns and finding relationship among patterns. But, and this is back to your question, good question, it still deals with the meaning making. And that's meaning making usually either hidden or it's hidden sometimes to the people even who are doing that, or sometimes it's not well, how to say that, not well pursued as well. Because it's hidden and because it becomes very uncomfortable for researchers to deal with that meaning making. And let me bring examples again, maybe from quantitative research. Many things about quantitative research when you start counting, and people think about like, sometimes they don't even, they jump immediately to counting without saying, why for this particular question that you have, this unit of counting is appropriate, right? What's the meaning behind that? My favorite examples, I'm using that with my students, and actually it's coming from, I think, Anas, your professor maybe from sociology in your
University of Pennsylvania.
I ask my students how many people in our class.
Yeah, that's my professor Ray Birdwhistle. He was an anthropologist.
Yeah.
When I took courses with him, one of the assignments he gave us is to go into somebody's house of the people we never met before and don't know socially, and they describe their living room. And I just want to say, and he always said there are more people in the room than bodies.
Yeah, but this sounds mystification. It's much better to do it in the classroom. When I ask my students how many people are in the classroom, well, first of all, this is, by the way, somebody should study in psychology, whatever. For some bizarre reason, usually my students, but graduate and non-graduate, do not count me a teacher. That's that. And in other, of course, things become confusing about should we count people who is in class but not in class, like they're sick or choose not to come to the class, whatever. Are they part of this class or not?
Or if somebody visits a child of some student or something.
Yeah, we had that situation as well. But this is again, what you're saying is much less interesting in a way. Then we start thinking about whether there is whole machinery behind the class. Like, for example, janitors who clean these rooms. Are they a part of our class or not part of the class? Also, the students in my classes discussed a lot of issues with their sometimes boyfriends, girlfriends, parents, friends, whatever. And they bring that to the class, their position. Are they part of our class or not part of our class? We read some people like, I don't know, Bakhtin, Vygotsky, whoever. Are they also part of our class because of or Plato or Socrates? We're talking about that. So are they, and we know their positions. Are they part of our class in certain ways or not? People who create register, all these, again, classes, are they part of our class or not part of the class? Spouses with whom some of our students have, especially graduate students for older, who have to negotiate their schedule and childcare and all of this in order to make sure they're coming to the class. And so we start asking that, so how to count, it's become not trivial question. It's about, again, it's become meaning making. What does it mean? You see, it's not how things are. Before even we're asking how things are, we need to ask, like, what does it mean to be a part of our class? So, and this is usually invisible for people who are doing research because they're so fast to get to that, and it's obvious who is that. And they may be right about how they choose that, but justification for that is usually missing. That's one thing. Of course, whatever quantitative part or qualitative part, and they find, of course, the next part of the become, what does it mean? And the problem is that different people will start seeing differently. And again, that becomes very uncomfortable part of doing research. Like, what does it mean exactly? For who? And so on and so forth. How do you know that? And all of this. What's value behind this? And that part also becomes like fuzzy and uncomfortable in the traditional research because it opens can of worms of this dialogic research in a way, which is why is it can of worms? Because you know that objectivity starts collapsing on this. And different people start seeing different things, and they start engaging in meaning making rather than pattern recognition.
And well, from the point of view of the positivist science, they would say this is outside of science also, but in a sense, this cannot be verified, it's not truth, and it's not out. Then this is where our limit as a science is, we cannot know anything scientifically about that.
And this is actually what you're saying again, you're trying to separate dialogic research from science.
Right. I'm just now saying from the, yeah, exactly. I'm trying to separate in a way because it would be illegitimate from the positivist science.
Let's talk about positive science because otherwise it becomes confusing. What you just said is very confusing to hear.
Well, from the positive point
but again, because I didn't hear the voice of the other. Okay. And that's a good question. Is dialogic research is science or not science? So in dialogic research, there is, of course, a way of doing that, but it's not a method. First of all, each time of doing it become unique, although people can borrow certain things, because in some sense, dialogic research and any authorship, if you think about it, because it's a bigger issue of authorship. Authorship is always based on some other given things which you transcend. You're taking something, somebody else's authorship or some material, something given, and transcend that, right? So you're always dealing with something that also given as well, and that givenness very important. So it's not that dialogic research is completely opposite to the positivist science, or you can clean up dialogic research from positivist science. No, it's actually like positivist science always has part of dialogic research, although it's hidden or not well done or uncomfortable for people to do that. The same thing is happening in opposite direction, in my view. That dialogic research always involved a positivist science or aspect of that, and you don't need to be uncomfortable about that. There is part of any subjectivity and authorship. It's a given, and it's an object, and there is nothing wrong about that either. Okay? So sorry for that long reply to your question. So in a way, both of them kind of, and let me put that way, I can see at least three possibilities. Maybe there are, so it could be mostly positive research, mostly dialogic, and really something like, difficult to say, it's like something that strong aspect of positivist and strong aspect of dialogic research. So I can see these possibilities for that. And that's why, in my view, talking about dialogic research art does not dismiss positivist science, but incorporating that, and in a way really appreciates that. What it doesn't appreciate when positivist science trying to move in the area when it's mostly has to be focused on dialogicity, or when it doesn't want to deal with this its own meaning making, or when it's doing that in a sloppy way. This is the problem. This is critique in a way, dialogic critique of positivist science, in my view.
Also, there is another critique of positivist science. The issue of positivist science denying dialogic art approach as legitimate for finding things about people. Like it doesn't count.
Yeah, and again, it's not finding people, because language is very important.
Finding things about people, finding about people's affairs and meanings and all of that.
Yeah, or again, meaning making about people. Yeah, that's true. So there is several things of positive science. But by the way, we can turn things around, especially in our age of fake news. And denial of the climate, global warming denials, and say that there is certain things that dialogic research
is not legitimate.
Yeah, can go in the illegitimate areas and aspects, and can become very disruptive, and like it can be very mystifying when. Like everything is possible, everything is point of view, somebody's point of view, and so on and so forth. It's like that's when dialogic research start denying positivist science. That becomes danger as well, which I see. And we're living in the time when these two dangers are extremely strong. On one thing, we have this big data that put any person in the box where some artificial intelligence will deal with that. Like in education, we're talking about standardization and testing, exams, when education itself defined from positivistically. This is one danger, huge danger. And we living and experience that. But opposite thing, in my view, creates no more danger as well.
No less danger.
No less danger as well. With idea of this mystification, idea of relativism, idea of the fake news, idea of this is my truth, this is your truth. and so on and so forth. Which is, again, my truth, your truth is possible as well, but it has limits.
Right.
It's about, it's okay about meaning making, but it's not okay to talk about how things are. You see?
And certain things are not in the meaning making, but I mean, ultimately, probably everything is a matter of opinion, but there is strong evidence for many, many people to agree.
No, it's not. Not everything is matter of opinion. This is where.
Sorry. My language is bad. That's true. Ultimately, the positive world in which we live is also a matter of opinion. In the last, it's about the truth is really in the agreement of important people.
No. We are in dangerous territory. This is what the other danger we're talking about. No, it's positivism very important. Monologism, basically, positivism is, you think about from dialogic point of view, it's monologism, and monologism should be appreciated because it has its important things. Like, for example, in order even for me to talk, for you guys to understand, I have to monologize. I have to finalize certain things. Okay, you can say it even temporarily, but it has to be done. Otherwise, it become when dialogics become excessive. It's very difficult to understand what it is. It becomes speaking in tongues, basically, because not like when I start even dialogize every word. Not even idea.
So you cannot even talk. Then everything falls apart. Right. Because on any point there is a depth abyss in which you fall because you're starting to dialogize. You cannot get out of that and go continue because you have to stop at every possible, not even word, but you have.
Using like Bruno Latour, who was a sociologist of the science, who actually discovered many things that even positivism is not that clear itself, and positivism is much more complex than people think about positivism. It's not necessarily the dialogic part that he picked up from positivism. He found a dualistic nation of positivism, because positivism looked like very monistic thing, but it's actually not. It's dualistic thing. But it's complexity of positivism itself, which is also interesting to discuss that. But it's kind of not necessarily that dualism is not necessarily it's not about dualism of dialogism and monologism. It's a different type of monologism that present in the science and positivism itself. Complicated. Maybe we kind of okay. Go ahead, Melissa. Your next questions or maybe
comments.
Okay. Well, another question I had is, what is the role of sameness or sort of the shared values that you might have in dialogue? Because you talk about the role of difference or disagreement, which I think is really important. But also, what is the role of agreement?
Well, again, I'm rather maybe radical view of that. For me, disagreement is primary feature of dialogue, and agreement is a kind of artifact of that. Agreement is something that we basically said for the purpose of whatever we're doing or whatever we're talking about, whatever. We just agree to not explore our differences. Uniqueness, which is quintessence of difference, uniqueness, is in my view, is heart of dialogism. That's why as soon as you're moving to sameness, you start moving towards objectifying. Again, nothing wrong about that. It's just disregarding this difference. But and to the positivist science, which is again, nothing wrong about that. Nothing wrong about it. Again, like for a certain purpose, there is nothing wrong to say that there is no difference between Eugene and Melissa for a certain purpose. In this case, we say sameness. There is nothing.
But can't you through dialogue find maybe you're having dialogue with someone that you don't see any agreement with? Maybe somebody who just views things so differently from you, but then through dialogue, you can somehow discover things you do have in common, or things that you do share that you couldn't find without dialogue?
Yeah, what does it, when you share and when you agree about something, it means you stop. You don't need to do anything. Okay, done. Okay, David is joining us.
That's very
Good.
interesting.
So from that point of view, again, there is nothing wrong about that, and because about that we can actually start moving to something else. This is kind of
I
done.
see.
When you say done, finalized, it becomes an object. On that we can stand on. Okay, and move on. So it's very helpful, but
I think
this is where authorship ends.
But exploring with someone or with among other groups of people, the configuration of these boundaries of difference and whatever seems to be same, to what extent and from what point of view we can, and it's not even about agreement, it's about the finding that we cannot find any difference. And I think of anything that we are dialoguing about other people's and our own meaning making is much more complex that we can fully even just have it as whole agreement or whole disagreement. But exploring the angles and the boundaries, where we touch and in what ways we touch each other's point of view, and whether that point of view then has to bounce or change or shift, or what happens to it, is much more interesting than to say whether we agree or not agree. I cannot agree this dialogue of the uniqueness about just exactly exploring how these ideas work with each other.
What would you say the role of intentionality is in this kind of dialogic research art? You know, do you have to have something specific, a phenomenon specifically that you're trying to explore together? Does it have no intention at all, or is your intention to create meaning and author together in that general sense? You know, I'm specifically thinking in terms of research. Do you have to articulate a phenomenon that you're trying to explore in order to do this kind of dialogic research?
I think every dialogic research, which is not just chat among friends, but has some kind of research intention, is first of all, why are we interested in that? Why are we doing that? What's the purpose? And from there it starts then intentionality.
I think that's a very interesting question about intentionality in research. Primary things for me is, in my view, well articulated this intentionality paradox in the research. By the way, in this case, I'm not talking about dialogic research or positivist research, any research, including positivist research, also masking this paradox, but paradox is there. And paradox was articulated Socrates / Plato, because we never know who is talking. Is it Socrates or Plato? Exactly. So, and it was in the dialogue on Meno. And it's interesting, it depends how it's translated, because I wonder how it's written. I want to know, because I saw different translation of Meno, both in Russian and English, and it's translated each time is differently. Sometimes almost non-recognizable, all of this.
Wow.
But some version of translation is very clear, and some not clear, in my view, in my reading. I would like to work maybe with Greek colleagues who will look at this Meno and just tell how it is. Anyway, this is how I understand that. So paradoxes sounds like that. By the way, if it's not Socrates and Plato, it means some translator created that. Which doesn't matter. It's more important what the paradox itself than who said that. So the paradox is that it is a paradox of research. If you know what you're looking for, why are you looking for that? It means you already found that. If you don't know what you're looking for, what you're looking for.
How do you know how to find?
It's not no. It's not
how to go about it.
No, it's even why you're doing that if you don't know even what you're looking for. So it's kind of fishing expedition when you don't know where is the fish is, and actually you don't even know what you're going for, fish or something else. And this is like paradoxes. So in dialogic, and again, you can actually look at this even positivist research, but especially dialogic research. It's kind of trusting yourself and people around you, what attracts your attention, and that's become interesting about that. But even initial, there is something that put you on this fishing expedition, and that's also interesting to know, like what puts you on that's part of the research. What puts you on this expedition, and who sends you on that expedition? Because sometimes it's, it's me who sends it, but sometimes it's not. Like I can give example of this interesting research that my colleagues and I were involved, and it was sent on that research expedition was sent by my students. I was discussing progressive education, actually innovative education. And there was a school nearby, actually, our university. It's a private progressive school. And I spent some time observing that and so on and so forth. So I was telling my students, just with specific example about this innovative progressive education. It's called New York Center for Creative Learning. And I received always the same question from my students, because it was many classes that I will be discussing that. Like how, this is actually school K7 in United States. It's from kindergarten to 7th grade. So after 7th grade, usually in Delaware at least, it starts high school. So they're going to the traditional high school. And always my students ask, not always, but often, they ask the same question. So how are they doing after, while they're going to conventional school? Are they suffering because the way how they're learning, there's no grades, no this, no that, but they have completely different things. And I always honestly was answering, I don't know. Until there was a student who was very persistent, and she said, Eugene, but you're an educational researcher. How long you can say, I don't know? Do it, study that. Because when I say don't know, I was looking honestly to the research of other people, and I couldn't find answer to that question. And I thought, well, maybe I didn't spend enough with the literature, maybe it exists. But anyway, she just, nailed that. And I thought, well, indeed, for how long I can say I don't know and be okay with that. By the way, I was telling that, I'm constantly saying I don't know. And she said, well, for how long are you going to do that? So it's pushed me and my colleagues, René de Palma and Mark Smith, to go there and to start that research. So in a way, this type of question, which was interesting for me, but not primary, but it became like we were sent on this mission by students who want to know about that, right? So sometimes it's not only researcher who is sending that, but somebody else. And that might be part of the research also to figure out who and why you're doing that. And then, of course, it becomes like, what does it mean? What's the effect? Are they suffering or not? In what way? What are you going to say? No, that's another story. And then you, that's not actually that. That's what's interesting in my view, because in dialogic research, you go there, and this is just why you came for that. But what you found is completely different. And that's why you should not engage in what these questions, what it means, because it will be just, it's just interesting from a kind of biographical and kind of historical point of view, why you even, what the hell you doing there, right? How you find yourself. But that's different question with what's there for you and other people. A good example is, and for me, that's probably in education, at least for me, was first dialogic research that I faced with. And actually it's very much emphasize that artistic quality of that research. That research by Joe Tobin and his colleagues in 80s. and the research was, they published a book and a video, and then second book and second video, actually not a video, but many videos. It's called Preschool in Three Cultures. And Joe Tobin both wrote in the, especially consequential books and in some articles, and I talked with him, and he told me that the initial idea was to go to Japan, to China, to United States, and he has international body of researchers. Some of them were from China, some were from Japan, and of course he's from United States, and just not pick up typical preschool, but some kind of preschool that gives you kind of a window to the cultural ideas of preschool in that particular culture. Just to do positivistic research, find interesting patterns and describe them and discuss them. He's by training, he's anthropologist, who is he was a judicial anthropologist. And he initially was following these things. So he has data, which is videotapes. In videotapes, he become attracted to interesting events. And events were like, for example, let me give some interesting event, probably one of the most interesting events, although maybe not, depends for who, right? One interesting event in Japanese classroom, there is a boy, his name is Hiroki, and who is very quick and very loud, very disruptive, and also could be aggressive. He beats, and it's videotape, how he hits a boy who starts crying, and then when the teacher calls for cleaning up the classroom, he's throwing cards, some kind of play cards from the balcony while the kids cleaning. And when I think girls came to the teacher and report on him, the teacher said, "Why are you telling it to me? Deal it with yourself." And continue. She was cleaning the classroom, which was like, what? And so they wanted to clarify what's the meaning behind that. Is it lazy teacher? Maybe it's so they start asking the teacher why she did this. Educators, Japanese educators in the school first, and then in the some not in the school. Maybe they just try to cover up ineffective teacher. And they found that to their big surprise that the Japanese educators are very much in support of that approach. And they start hearing reasons behind that. The idea of that actually Japanese people see fighting among little kids as normal and desirable things because they experience consequences, and learning how to solve problems themselves, which is, you see that in the video as well, because one of the girls picks up this boy who was hurt, who was crying, and brought him to the other group of the kids who didn't observe what's happened, ask this boy what's happened, and then give him advice not to play with this boy because it's rather often happened. So you see that communal response to that, which is what Japanese educators look like, looking for that, and you see that's emerging. But then he discovered that Japanese teachers, this is their kind of view of that, but American educators and Chinese educators see this, it's scandalous by that.
Yeah. Kids from fighting, they will become bullies, they will become, they hurt other children, they have to learn how to behave nicely, you know.
So suddenly, think about this in a way, pathway of artistic pathway, research artistic pathway of Joe Tobin and his colleagues. Initially, they came to the Japanese educators to verify what they saw, the phenomena that they observed. Like, what's behind that? So, is it how we see? Is it our understanding is correct? So, it's about typical positivistic verification of the data. But at some point, Joe Tobin and his colleagues realized, wait a minute, that is not verification. This is another data. And suddenly everything becomes finding data. And they start seeing the research not as reporting findings, which is what we found, finalized. It's a findings coming from this. You found, you put something like this.
Or even when they heard the Japanese educators' explanations to objectify them and says, well, Japanese kind of like they become then objectified. They don't understand what they are doing because they have this wrong view or something like that.
But the task, so it become for them is how to put different views in contact with each other and try to reveal justification reasons and, of course, values behind them, right? So, for example, American and Chinese educators have this idea of continuity of development. If you not stop this aggressive kid, the kid will become criminal. But Japanese see suddenly child development as discontinuous. Kids has to experience violence and aggression.
In which they have to go.
Not only that, it's discontinuous. You cannot, like Japanese educators say, that's why you have in the United States so much violence, because authority
restrain it.
Yeah. And that's, so you start hearing that, and it's bringing to the readers, and there is no final word. The author is not providing final word, but prepare for next dialogue with the readers, for the readers page. Okay? And to expect that some Japanese will split and Chinese will split.
Or in different situations. There is a different situation in a Japanese kindergarten where the teacher interferes in a fight of children and says, why did you do this to this boy, and then lie to me, and all kinds of things. So then it becomes even more interesting. What's their view? Where does it stop about like children have to do themselves? Where and why? How all this works is not just uniform.
So in a way, dialogic research is kind of preparation for putting people in contact, dialogic contact, and preparation for dialogue in which there will, in a way, dialogic research, it's preparation, dialogic research in which readers will be involved in the next stages. So it's a research that prepares for dialogic research of the readers, in a way, if you think about that, and other communities. Research communities, educator communities, parents, children, whoever involved. So this is will become kind of the whole kind of things about, but it can be, each time it will be done very, very, very differently, and there is no the same thing.
There's something sort of unsatisfying about reading a dialogue in comparison to participating in a dialogue. And when I was thinking about how to present my research, I did find it kind of frustrating to turn a dialogue into text, written text, because there's so many qualities of you know, the active dialogue that I think are removed once you put it into written text. And so I was wondering if you have any thoughts about that, and if there's any way to present dialogic research that's not just written text.
Well, one of the, of course, what you're saying, it's has long history. Again, like Socrates, which is funny, because Socrates, so, from what we know, he was illiterate in the sense that he couldn't read and write. And not only that, but he was against reading and writing.
Distrusted, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was written by Plato. But Dmitry Nikulin, in the modern times, like emphasized this point about the fact that not only it's a text that kills dialogue, but even you can actually do in dialogue and writing as well. I mean, interactive part of dialogue, like for example, chat room. In the chat room, you quickly in real time.
Right. Or texting to each other.
Texting each other. Still, from point of view against Socrates, it's a little bit better. It's a little bit better because one part of the problem with the text, you can ask questions text, but text will not reply to you. Very impolite. Very
text is very impolite.
very death kind of things. Talking to the text. And also it's like also if you think from power point of view, the text has huge power of you because it says things, right? It's yell at you almost, not yell, but again, you can read that. But, and that's it. And that's it. I don't want to hear your reply. I don't want to hear your reply. If you think about social way, what the text is, like somebody's telling you to you, and you say, let me think, this is interesting.
But you cannot answer back.
Like this. Which is very non-dialogic. The question is, like, how to my position on that, text, of course, has reduced dialogicity, but it's never kills it entirely. So I'm kind of, I kind of appreciate what Dmitry Nikulin and Socrates is talking about, but I say, well, it's possible to deal with that, but you know that it's kind of, you sacrifice certain things.
Yeah.
There's another problem with the text. There is another problem with the text, which is, this is actually back to your, Melissa, question about Western culture. Yeah. I would say, and it's not necessarily Western in terms of that something happened in the West, but there is certain quality what we call Western culture. It's like literate, schooled, and schoolish, and other things. Since I was raised by my illiterate grandmother, which is so difficult to talk about her as a literate person because she was with rich orality, right, person. I'm always noticed that there is certain things that that literate culture really at odds with this oral culture.
Yeah.
And exactly around things of positivism and in a way dialogism. Like she drove my a lot of my like highly schooled and highly educated relatives crazy. Let me tell you why, and this is very important thing what you're talking about. She will tell story about, and sometimes it's biographical stories, so it's about fact, right? This is kind of positive, it's fine. But the funny thing that's happened that each time she will tell it differently. And so, of course, the question, so what is really happened? And she said, this is what really happened. But you say, but you told like whatever, a few months ago or last year, this what happened differently. And it's not like she will deny that or forgot about that. She said, yes, that's true. So you will have. And so which is true? And she was saying, well, this is what I was telling back then for that occasion. And that was true. And now I'm telling for this occasion. And this is true. So in a way, she's, if you think about, I don't know if you watched movie or read the book, Rashomon.
Yeah.
And the Japanese, there is actually, it's based on several novels, several stories. But it's the question if you, I don't know, David, if you know that. It's kind of, there is crime happened. Basically, it's a crime story.
Crime investigation.
There was rape, and there was killing. That's the only thing we know for sure. But anything else we don't know because we have several stories. In the movie, we see the stories. They're told by different people, different participants, and one of them actually that participant, and the spirit tells that story. So we have actually 4 stories. One witness who observed that hiding, a peasant who was hiding and observed that. One of considered to be perpetrator, the one who did rape and killing, and a woman, young woman who was raped, and her husband who was killed. And it's from his spirit. The spirit. There are 4 stories. You ended up with the person.
Sometimes you cannot even begin to put them together. It's like a nightmare. How can it be so different?
But of course, if you think about that, the problem is, of course, from what we're talking about, the meaning making and positivity are constantly, in this particular case, on conflict with each other. Because, of course, people want to not just know what's happened, but what's the meaning of that, what's happening, right?
And the
and
meaning
of
is
course,
different.
and
Different
many
people in different times.
right.
There is a British novelist, Lawrence Darrell, and if you're acquainted with that, Alexandria Quartet, it's a collection of 4 novels, where 3 of them are about exactly the same period of time and the same people, also written from the point of view of different protagonists, completely like you suddenly like, wow, everything that you taught from the first book now is upside down. And then in the 3rd is completely different. The 4th book is a continuation in time and also change, but you know what happened later, also from only one 4th character there. So it's a very similar to Rashomon, but
okay, but we're not about Rashomon and but not art.
Right.
Returning back to your question, how to address that issue?
Yeah. I was thinking, if you don't mind, or you can finish. It's just that I think you're focused very much right now in something that is very key, that is the diversity of the story or of the meaning. And I think about dialogic research, what is interesting is to experiment with diversity of how to write it. Not only write it, but putting in different platforms. For instance, what I tried to do, which I will say didn't really work, was kind of creating a novel of what happened. And when I was making it, I saw the difference with Joseph Tobin that you were talking about. Like, video has so much diversity on it than text. Because when I write something, it's I kind of know everything that is in there as a researcher. But when I record something, there is so many things I am not seeing and the viewer can see. So there's more diversity then. And something that I tried, it's infographies. Like trying to put it on plastic or pictures. I think about dialogic research, what is interesting is it's about meaning making, and it's about provocations and provoke people to enter in meaning making about the topic we are researching about. So we should get involved into experiment different ways of saying things to people. And this is where we can start to find, for instance, I want to say about killing dialogue. I think we have to somehow get through, we are gonna kill it somehow at some point, temporarily. It will be reborn, but it's okay. Any finding is going to kill dialogue for a time, but you also need to kill it in order to it to be reborn. You need to kill it a little bit in order someone can see what you said and then start again. Okay. But maybe we have about research on it. We have something usual with social networks or forums on internet that can also work better than a book, and it's more futile. It can, but I think basically about this issue, how to address it, is about diversity on the very making of the findings. I will say that's at least what I am trying.
And this is basically you stole my reply to Melissa, because that's what I'm saying. Well, diversify and try, and it's creativity. There is no, like in our book that you started with chapter from our book that we're working on, Bakhtin, by and for educators. One thing that we're trying to preserve voices, but also we're not shy from bringing our strong voice. At the same time, we showed or shared our text, near final text, with our participants. And some people didn't have time, but some fortunately found time. And they provided feedback, sometimes very critical, sometimes very strong disagreement, sometimes even very upsetting for them things, because they so much disagree about our finalizing them. But we included that in the book in contextual way. It was contextual, and at the end of the book, because some comments were holistic, some not, Some we choose to reply because certain things they were asking us, and it's important to reply to that. But some we choose not to choose to reply because we thought this lets them hang and present good questions for the readers. Although even they can sometimes direct it at us, we thought let's keep them. But sometimes it makes sense to reply because it's so like, otherwise it's almost irresponsible. Otherwise you exactly like people telling to you and you say, I don't want to reply because I want to keep it open. That's not necessarily honest that either.
If you have a reply and if you want to be responsible for why you in the first place form some opinion, to explain that or to say, oh, I did maybe even change it or whatever, but it's taking responsibility for your previous finding that somebody then threw back at you and said something there, asked you to be answerable or responsible for that.
And again, dialogicity in that sense always kind of going against positivist side. Positivist side, this is how things are. This is period. Okay, you might somebody challenge that. How do you know that? Or I disagree with that, or something like that. But the idea is that period at the end of your presentation of your research is a period. With, in my view, with dialogic research, it's always question mark. The research, if you think about it as a genre, as a question mark, it's an invitation to discuss things rather than period. And of course, when it's mixing this, it will be some period and some question marks. There is nothing wrong with that. It's not about avoiding elimination all periods and having only question marks.
No, because there is no template. There is no shabloon. You don't know.
No, behind that is, I'm talking about spirit things. I'm not talking about this even creativity part, but because it is always have aspect of positivist science, any dialogic research, in my view. And if it's not it's not revealed by the researchers, it means they're hiding it, or either from themselves or from readers. And it's a good idea to involve in that and to do kind of this positivistic science. How do we know that? And all of this, to do that positivistic science part well, which means not necessarily to follow kind of positivist narrative about science, because again, Bruno Latour showed us that it's much more complicated than that positivist narrative, but at least to be attentive to that and not to be ashamed of that and not to feel that you're betraying something dialogic or this. You just need to know that, no, this is not much dialogic part. It still have some part of meaning making, but it is mostly because you're telling about us how things are. This is what you're, that part about how things are. But there is other part, you're talking about what the hell it means, and does it mean the same for the same people, different people, and so on and so forth. Like, you know, but sort of things, how things are. Like in Rashomon's story, we know the killing happened, and the killing is positive things, and rape happened as well. And this, at least 3 people cross their lines, and it's pretty, we don't need to spend too much time, what does it mean crossing, or what does it mean rape, or what does it mean killing? You know, although killing it a little bit more because killing become a little bit, that's part of the story as well. What does it mean kill? Because some characters argue that they were killed before being physically killed by behavior of other or action of the other characters. I'm talking about, if you remember the story, I'm talking about this husband who thought that he was dishonored by his wife
even before
the whole thing happened. But that's another part of that. But in a way, that's if you're doing that part, you should not be apologetic much about doing this part of this positivistic stuff, and not afraid numbers, and not afraid other things that if you feel that useful to bring that. Melissa?
Yeah, a lot of you know, it's very typical in qualitative research to outline epistemology, ontology, axiology, methodology. Is that important to talk about with dialogic research? And if so, what would you say the epistemology, ontology, and axiology is? Would you say that we know things through dialogue, and that existence is dialogue, and you know, I don't know about the axiology. The value is that we value everyone's input equally, or you know, and then that would lead us to a dialogic methodology. Is that important to talk about, since other qualitative research always has those categories?
That's a good question. For me, like, you know, I'm always feel uneasy, again, coming from the, if it's art, that all of this, you know, demands to do something, do this, okay? Because if you start looking at the art, as soon as you start demanding, and some art also demanding things, right?
Yeah,
but you will find some other artists who say, I don't want that, for my art is different. And by the way, there are a lot of people who say, oh, that means it's either not art at all or a bad art. But looking at it with a time perspective, you start become it's silly. That was very silly, or not silly, but sometimes it's power. It's just like you basically trying to about that. So that's behind that, like all this. So I feel it's an interesting issue to consider, but interesting for whom? Some people find them interesting, and some people say, oh, that's not in my mind. And in my view, it's not a good idea to obligate everybody to engage in these questions that for some people can be extremely interesting, and for some people it's that's nothing.
And you can look at the dialogic research also really when it's contextualized in a particular issue and for particular people. First of all, it could be part of some action research where people who come together to find out how they will do something better. So why would they talk about epistemology, you know, in that sense? For them, it's not an esoteric thing about just how to do better art, but how to do a better life for them. You know?
I will say it's about audience. When normally scientific work is about rules, but not only rules. I mean, the rules that make sense in the scientific method, and things that you need to checkmark. But in dialogic research is about the audience you are addressing to, and if you will or not, it can be or not being open for different audience. You can. It's what Anna was saying. If you are in a dialogic research that is part of an action research, maybe you have a very much clear audience, and that's okay. But maybe you can also have thing I want to be open to many audiences. And I think in dialogic, not dialogic research, but dialogic writing of the research, you should be thinking, who are you talking to? Because you are not talking anymore to these voices up in there of the big science. You are thinking on real people you want to talk with. Well, that's how I think about it.
Yeah. And another thing, like, for example, equal input. It's impossible. What does mean equal input? By the way, that idea of equal coming from idea that something, that one could be the same as another.
Yeah.
Which is again, from the logic point of view, is very disrespectful thing to say. That two inputs can be, it's almost like, how come what David said can be in any way the same as Anna? It means that they're mutually replaceable. You can cut David because for some convenience and replace it with Anna in that sense.
Okay.
Right?
That's a very good point, because I about my research, when I share it with that I think I don't consider my research as dialogic, because I kind of didn't succeed on it, but I wanted it to be, and that's how I wrote it somehow. But it's interesting because when I was putting it in common with my research thing, a colleague of mine said, well, your methodology is very important. You have to write it as if anyone will take your methodology, could write your results. And I was like, no, it doesn't work like that. Like, no, it doesn't work like that. No, and that's that. It's true. It is disrespectful. I felt disrespect as an author.
I think that there's for me, rather than you know, methods, it's more of an ethos, you know, that kind of governs your interactions and your choices. So I think anybody can develop a dialogic ethos toward the world and toward others, and that then ethos informs all the decisions that they make based on their unique situation and their unique interest and inquiry.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And I think it's a very good term to use. But the whole thing, exactly, if you think about from positivist science, and again, I'm not saying that it's something wrong in per se. It's just to eliminate any subjectivity. To eliminate subjectivity, like what David, you say, there is a method. If you anybody who is trained well and follow this method, where you should arrive to the same things. That is opposite to the meaning making. You should not arrive to the same things because it's authorial, the first of all, making. Because as soon as everybody can arrive to the same thing, it's not a meaning making, it's logic or something else, which is not meaning making. It's about logic, it's about, again, it's another way of making patterns. That's why logic things can be easily delegated to computers, because they can do that. They can do that.
Follow the routine.
So follow rules or patterns recognition, which is not rules, or not always rule based. But that is part of the, in my view, non-human. The human part is about meaning, authorial meaning making. And this is what, returning back to the question, which is very interesting. Some people feel very strong that we should probably abandon the idea of the sign and call it humanity. By the way, let me give some names behind that. The recent people, well, I know that our colleague Mikhail Gradovsky argues for that. Also, I'm just reading a book by Gary Morrison. It's called Sense and Sensibility. A very interesting book about exactly kind of humanistic view of economy. And he wrote it together with economists. It's a very interesting book. There is a lot of questions, but his idea that there is, he doesn't call it positivist science, but he implies that. And there is humanity and how they can inform each other. And
he just calls it humanity.
He calls it humanity. I'm not sure. I'm not ready to surrender. No surrender. You know, interesting. Bakhtin's position was, which is I'm much more sympathetic to that. But it's coming from Russian tradition, and maybe that's coming from German tradition, because usually Russians borrow that part of this from Germany for some reason, historical reason. And it's Russian is called humanitarian sciences. You know, in English, they drop notion of science and the humanitarian, and in Russian, they preserve that. Like in famous essay that he wrote in book 1986 that was translated, Jean's, what is called speech genres. I forgot how they translated that, but it's actually Bakhtin in Russian version. It's called humanitarian sciences. When he criticized he compare exact sciences versus humanitarian sciences. It kind of sciences without voice and with voice. And I think I'm much more sympathetic to Bakhtin's version of preserving the notion of science, not kind of say the science equal positivism, but there is positivistic oriented science and dialogic oriented science, and something combined together, heavily combined together. And I'm kind of going with that for many different reasons. First of all, again, starting with your, Melissa, great question. If you look at the positivist science, it has this irreducible dialogic aspects. And again, if you look at any dialogic research, you will find this irreducible, and Bakhtin was talking about that as well. Positivist. So in this case, in my view, it's worth preserving that. But again, I can be wrong. There are other opinions about that, and it's interesting to engage in more dialogue about that.
Very interesting area to see why and how dialogue plays in positivist science and how positivist science plays in humanistic sciences. Because is it there are many questions how to create the relationship between the two.
And of course, you can challenge me or people like Bakhtin as well. And I think it's great. We need that challenge, like how, let's say, dialogic journalism is different from dialogic science. And in other interesting areas, just to pick up them, or I don't know, law or some other areas of that involves argumentation, for example, strong argumentation, and to see like any attempt to think about the differences. Because positivist science gives very strong ready-made answers about, we have our method. It should be controlled, or it should be randomized samples. And I'm just a little bit caricaturing about that.
I would go for that, because I think the purpose of both humanistic science and the natural science or positivist science is in both ways to examine the world, to examine the self, to examine other people. It's not the purpose, let's say, of art may not be to examine. Examination may be an artifact or a way that art was to express something, not to examine something. So there are different purposes of art and science, and in that sense, this is humanitarian.
No, it's interesting, but I'm just encouraged that dialogue that we just started, maybe to move that and continue. Okay, any other like burning, because we are running a little bit too late, but last kind of things that David, Melissa, and Anna, you have something that we need to address at least a little bit.
Well, to me, then it becomes a issue of how to and why. First of all, why I think it's very important that people who are working in educational research or psychological research would be open to accept in larger amounts this approach, because I think today the weight is too much on the positivist science, and so it's lacking the depth of what this can do. And then in that sense, how to and I don't like this actually that I'm saying how, but where to find the openings for people's thinking to be provoked to do that.
Well, in quick answering, first of all, I think we should publicize these ideas. They're not very known. Second, of course, engage in discussion, debates, dialogue with this more positivistically minded colleagues. That I think it will be helpful.
And this getting to how broad this way of understanding science is, I think it's very needed because of participants. For me, it was kind of hard to get participants in dialogue. One part was my fault because I was thinking on something that was interesting for me, and that it's not necessarily interesting for them. But and that's something you cannot do dialogic research with someone that is not interested in what you are doing research about, and you have to go through it. That's okay. But some part, it's how they understood science work. They thought that if they will be disagree with what I said, that will kind of make wrong my research. And that's about kind of the framework of how it was. And I think it's interesting to start to talk about another way of doing research where people understand that disagreeing and getting involved and diverging, it's okay. Because otherwise everybody goes to positivistic way when disagreeing is not okay. And I don't know if I made my point.
No. On the first one, in my view, it's still dialogic when you think something and other person says, I don't want to talk about that. That's not very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because in a way, from my dialogical approach, it's not dialogic only with the participants, although dialogicity there as well present. But it's dialogue, first of all, and most of all, with your audience, or you're preparing the dialogue. It's preparation dialogue. It's very nice if your participants are interested in what you're interested in. But in any way, it's strange to expect that it will happen all the time. Sometimes it is, like, for example, when we wrote our book and we gave feedback, there are certain things that I would love to comment certain people, that people either were too busy or not interested, or where they commented, but not about that. And I cannot just say, well, wait a minute, but what do you think about that? Well, this is what they think about that. There are other things attracted their attention.
You're right.
Yeah, no, that I think that's perfectly okay, and I agree on that. One of the participants didn't answer at all, and I think, well, that's okay. He's not on this topic now. He's doing all the things. That's perfectly fine. But when the reasons they give, it's, well, I don't want to make your research wrong. It's like, no. I think this is the dangerous part for dialogue. Where they hide their own voice because they think their voice will make the research.
Yeah, I think for me, I find it even difficult to think of it as a researcher and participants. In my case, it was easier though. I mean, my dialogue partner and I were colleagues. We were both students, we were both teachers, and we were both inquiring together. It was just that I was doing the dissertation, so, you know, the analysis and the final writing was all on me. But I think that we were really co-inquirers, we were really co-researchers, and there wasn't really a distinction between researcher and participant. And for me, that was really important, and I kind of take that orientation in all my research. I always feel like I'm inquiring together with this other person. But you have to really work to set up that kind of dynamic, you know, to build that kind of trust and to create that kind of openness. It's not easy at all to do, and it takes time. It takes a lot of time. You know, I mean, my dialogue partner and I talked for 6 years to do the research. Yeah, so that's definitely a challenge, I think.
You're touching upon something that may be a theme for another big talk, is that the dialogic research approach has a completely different set of values that are very organizing our schools, our society, where that monopoly of the science, let's say positivist science, has to give in to local decision making.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry to say that I must leave.
We will, sorry to say, must leave.
We have also to leave.
Sorry,
okay.
Sorry, David, we have to leave.
First to us, and then you can because you came later. You cannot leave first.
Right. And you will be the last person who's leaving. And cleaning Zoom. You have to clean Zoom after our meeting.
Yes. Us, you know, we introduced ourselves at the beginning of the podcast, and since this is going to be publicized, let's introduce you. You're David García Romero from Spain. Actually, better said from Barcelona, Catalonia.
Yeah.
And many others.
Sorry that I was late.
And from Delaware as well. Okay.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.